Adoption of the minutes as so aforementioned.
Question is that these minutes be adopted. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Excuses for absence.
I have a number of excuses for persons absent this morning. These persons are Senator Crystal Driggs, Senator Monique Tate, Senator Gregory Nichols, our president, Mr. Reginald Fardy, our deputy president, Elizabeth Thompson, Ms. Christina Hines, and Ms. Crystal Haynes.
Messages from Her Excellency the President. Announcement by Your Honor.
Continue. Leader of Government Business.
Mr. President, I beg to move that we now have the appointment of a deputy president, an acting deputy president. Mr. President, I am commanded to lay the following documents: the audited financial statements of the Barbados Agricultural Management Company Limited for January 30th, 2018, the 2021 annual report and financial statements of the Central Bank of Barbados, the Barbados Conference Services Limited annual report for 2021, and then the green paper on the national sports policy.
Reports from select committees. Questions to ministers. Request for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance. Statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries. Personal explanations. Motions related to the business or sitting of the Senate and moved by a minister.
Leader of the Government Business.
Mr. Acting President, I beg to move that we do appoint a deputy president for the duration of today's sitting. And on that basis, I wish to recommend the appointment of Senator the Honorable Lindell Nurse as the acting deputy president for the duration of today's sitting.
The question is that Senator Nurse be appointed as deputy for today's sitting. Those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those honorable members not in favor, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Senator Nurse, you are duly elected for the sitting.
Mr. Acting President, I am required to give notice of the following bill, Protection of Agricultural Products Bill, and to move the first reading of the following bills. The Financial Services Commission Amendment Bill 2022, the Financial Services Commission Miscellaneous Provisions Validation Bill 2022, and the first reading also of the Electric Light and Power Bill 2022. I'm also giving a first reading notice for the Protection of Agricultural Products Bill, Mr. President.
The question is that the following bills, we read the first thing.
The question is that the following bills be read a first time. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All honorable members in disagreement, please say no. And methinks the ayes have it.
Public business. Public business being the instant order of the day. Order Order number 5, Mr. President, in the name of the Honorable Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to approve in accordance with Section 3 of the University of the West Indies Guarantee of Loans Act, Chapter 106B, the guarantee by the government of Barbados, the government of approximately Barbados $2 million of an approximate Barbados $12 million loan to be granted to the University from the Caribbean Development Bank for the purpose of the financing the Regional Digital Transformation Project.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you very much, Mr. Acting President. I rise on this occasion to introduce this resolution. It may appear at first blush, Mr. President, Mr. Acting President, to be a relatively simple matter. It is the government of Barbados providing a guarantee to a sum of money, $2 million on average, which constitutes a percentage of a total of $12 million being borrowed by the University of the West Indies and guaranteed jointly by 3 entities, namely the government of Barbados in the sum of $2 million, the government of Antigua and Barbuda for an equivalent sum, and Sagicor Financial Limited, Mr. Deputy President, for the remaining amount. And it is to guarantee the repayment of both the principal and the interest to the Caribbean Development Bank. Now, Mr. President, you may ask, and I believe that there are instances where the question of support to and support for the University of the West Indies and the important role that the University of the West Indies plays in Caribbean development, and therefore why a government would subscribe to the principle of supporting the University of the West Indies. Now, Mr. President, it is known to every Barbadian that historically it has been a practice of the government of Barbados, successive administrations, until it was brought to an end in the last administration, for a government to support the work of the University of the West Indies by, in the first instance and principally, paying for the tuition fees of all Barbadians at the University of the West Indies. And I want to put this in context, Mr. President. When I say the University of the West Indies, I mean the University of the West Indies on all of its campuses and not just here in Barbados at the Cave Hill campus. As you know, the University of the West Indies has 5 campuses. We have here at Cave Hill, there is the University of the West Indies campus at Mona in Jamaica. I am a proud graduate of the University of the West Indies at Mona campus, and I'm a proud Irvinite as well. I know that there's at least one other Irvinite in here, and there are other people who went on other halls, namely the Senior Minister for the Government of Barbados and the Minister of Foreign Affairs. He is a Taylorite, so we are all proud UWI Mona graduates, and I'm seeing that Senator Christopher Maynard also would have passed through the hallowed walls of the Mona campus. I think all of us have a specific and a very unique source of pride about our university, but in particular about our campus. There is also, Mr. Acting President, the University of the West Indies campus at St. Augustine in Trinidad and Tobago. And more recently, you now have the Five Islands campus, which was recently opened just about 3 years ago in Antigua and Barbuda. And of course, you have the open campus, which we have already been advised by the principals of the University of the West Indies is now being transformed into the UWI Global Campus. And so we have a reason as a Caribbean people to be extraordinarily proud of this institution that we describe in CARICOM terms as the premier institution of functional cooperation in this region. And this institution has educated Caribbean nationals for as long as its history, and it has provided an opportunity for many of us who sit in this chamber here to have had the benefit of a tertiary level education, both at the bachelor's level for undergraduate and then for the postgraduate level for master's and in some instances even PhD doctoral studies and postgraduate study, Mr. President. It has contributed overwhelmingly to the development of Caribbean civilization. Now, Mr. President, why is this particular project important? And the specifics of the project were elaborated on in the other place by the minister in the Ministry of Finance and by the Minister of Education. And so I'm not going to go into those things in any great detail because quite a substantial amount of information has been provided for this project. But however, I want to just share the 5 main areas of emphasis for this particular loan program to the University of the West Indies. 1, it is meant to enhance the institution's global competitive advantage. It will promote the upgrading of its ICT systems. It will allow for the training of staff and students. It will allow for the digitalization of programs and courses for online access. And ultimately, when you are functioning in a digital space, Mr. President, it is critical that you have an investment in cybersecurity protection, and that is the final tenet, Mr. President. In terms of institutional strengthening, there are 4 main elements that I want to focus on. 1, the emphasis on harmonizing business processes in order to facilitate efficient and seamless student rollout and sharing across campuses. Now, I'm going to come back to the question of sharing across campuses, Mr. President, because this is one of the efficiencies that the University of the West Indies has been investing in over the last few years. Secondly, the revitalization of the UWI's global web presence, the preparation of a business continuity disaster recovery plan for the UWI and the campuses which I just mentioned. And then finally, this is where I want to anchor my comments today, Mr. President, the development of a socially inclusive and gender responsive strategic development plan and business plan for the UWI Global Campus, about which I spoke earlier. Now, Mr. President, COVID was a disruptor in every possible way. COVID created challenges and opportunities in sectors that traditionally would have functioned in a very different way than it did post-COVID. Mr. President, I had the privilege at the onset of COVID in 2020 to have been a member of the executive leadership team and the executive management team of the University of the West Indies. And I had the opportunity at the time, Mr. President, to co-chair the reassumption of the University of the West Indies in-person classes at the time, along with Dr. Knut Brown, where we looked at how the University of the West Indies would reopen to classes, how it would function in a COVID environment, and how we would continue to ensure that as an institution, the University of the West Indies was contributing to the development of Caribbean people as it has done historically over the lifetime of the University of the West Indies. Now, Mr. President, the question of social inclusion and the question of digitalization became central to those discussions. And why is that, Mr. President? We still live in a world where everything is transacted on these small devices, our phones, we use our tablets, we use our computers, and in some instances, Mr. President, we forget that social exclusion provides a perfect platform where people who are socially marginalized but have been enabled to acquire tertiary level education may be at a disadvantage as a result, Mr. President, of having to move into an entirely online space. Certainly as a government, here in the government of Barbados, we undertook during the course of the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic to provide devices to students who then had to transition from in-person classes to being online. Many students did not have access to devices, Mr. President. They did not have computers. They did not have tablets. And even if they had those devices, Mr. President, they depended on the ability to function in a school environment where Wi-Fi was free. But we still live in an environment, Mr. President, where everyone does not have access to these things that many of us take for granted. Access to Wi-Fi, in some instances, access to basic electricity. Mr. President. And so the University of the West Indies had to find itself in an environment where we were catering not just to students who were capable of coming back into the classroom or preparing to come back into the classroom, but students who had to go online in an environment where their social circumstances and their personal economic circumstances did not lend itself to that. And it could potentially have been destructive to their own personal development and their educational development, Mr. President, had a mechanism not been put in place to allow for those persons to, one, have access to devices, have access to Wi-Fi, and I want to take the opportunity to commend the telecommunications companies that came on board with the University of the West Indies to ensure that there was a provision of safe spaces, safe virtual spaces for students to be able to take advantage of their educational platforms. And I also want to take the opportunity, Mr. President, to recognize those multiple private sector companies that donated devices to Caribbean people all across the region to be able to continue their education. Because without a government like Barbados and many of the other governments across the Caribbean that continue to contribute to the University of the West Indies by way of direct tuition support, many of these students who would have been enabled access would not have been able to use that access without the provision of either Wi-Fi or devices where they could continue their education. And I think that is a moment, Mr. President, that all of us have had to reflect on. And so here comes the University of the West Indies that acknowledges, having gone into a digital space, having launched the UWI Open Campus and then the Global Campus, which is underway, having gone through COVID, Mr. President, where social inclusion and access for all students, whatever their means and whatever their personal circumstances, Mr. President, that they are able to function in that new digital space. That's the space that we're in, Mr. President, Mr. Acting President. And so the University of the West Indies is now taking this to a different level. The University of the West Indies is working along with another institution of functional cooperation across the Caribbean, the Caribbean Development Bank. And they are investing in a digital transformation program for the University of the West Indies using the strategic plan, which focuses on access, alignment, and, Mr. President, agility. And this is one of those instances where agility is going to be critical, especially in this digital space, Mr. President. Now, what is going to be the focus of the loan for the University, for the University of West Indies? The loan is going to focus on the specific development of the project. It is going to also be matched by a grant from the Caribbean Development Bank, which is going to focus on institutional strengthening activities. It is also going to benefit from counterpart financing from one of our international bilateral partners, who will then be putting forward an additional 27% of the project costs for preparation, institutional strengthening, capacity building, and project management. Now, Mr. President, I'm very proud whenever I stand in this place to speak about issues relating to education, to speak from a platform where the Barbados Labour Party has had a long history of supporting tertiary level education and the University of the West Indies specifically. Mr. President, it is no secret, I think every Barbadian knows, that it was the Barbados Labour Party who made the decision immediately upon resuming office in 2018 to once again ensure that every single Barbadian citizen who aspires to have a tertiary level education from the University of the West Indies could again have their tuition fees paid and be again able to walk through the halls of the University of the West Indies and claim success for themselves and in many instances for their families, Mr. President, because this has been the way to income mobility in many instances. But long before that, Mr. President, this administration has also been a strong supporter of the University of the West Indies. We recall under previous Barbados Labour Party administration, lands that were vested in the University of the West Indies to allow for the development of a graduate studies center on lands at the Lazaretto. We also have the newest faculty of the University of the West Indies, which is the faculties focusing on the creative industries. You, Mr. President, Mr. Acting President, would have been also very proud to have worked with that institute, with that faculty. That faculty sits on lands vested in the University of the West Indies by this Barbados Labour Party administration when last it was in office. Mr. President. Since we were in office again, Mr. President, we have also come to this House and to the other place, and we vested lands at the St. Joseph Hospital to allow for a medical service and medical sciences project to evolve, focusing specifically on diabetes reversal studies. We have a history, Mr. President, of investing in the development of our people, in supporting Caribbean development, and in supporting the University of the West Indies specifically. Now, this is not a long resolution, and so my presentation is not going to be very long either. I want, however, Mr. President, to use my remaining minutes to focus on the future of the University of the West Indies and the role that the University of the West Indies has to play in the development of Caribbean, of this region. Mr. President, over the last 10 years, we have seen the investment in programs and projects like Skills for the Future. We have seen the region investing in what are the identification, how can we identify those skills that will position us as a country in the first instance and as a regional civilization for the next wave of development. We have seen the development of priority areas for Barbados. We have seen the development of priority areas for each country and for the region as a whole. We have seen the industrial development trajectory that we have been evolving into, Mr. President, and certainly here in Barbados, we have seen our own Prime Minister and our own government speaking about things like the investment in life sciences. We have seen our own country talking about the investment in things like medicinal cannabis research. And we have persons who are sitting in this chamber, Mr. President, who I'm sure are in a much better position and far more equipped to speak on those topics than I would be. And so I wouldn't venture into those areas at all. I leave that for them. But there are a range of emerging disciplines, even within our existing disciplines, that now have an opportunity for us to invest in their development, including the same digitalization, including in ICT development, including in research and development, so that the skills for the future that will position this region into the next wave of our development will be coming through our tertiary level institutions, will be a part of our own approach to education sector reform from primary through secondary, all the way up through tertiary, so that the future generations of this country, Mr. President, are able to evolve into disciplines that will position them to work here and to work anywhere in the world, but also not just to come back to Barbados and to get jobs, not just to walk into an available job because that is a sector that has already been established, but to create and build new sectors, new industries, new levels of entrepreneurship, and therefore new growth trajectories for this country that we all love, Mr. President. And it is on this basis, Mr. President, that I believe that this is money well spent. I continue to be supportive of the University of the West Indies. I continue to support the trajectory of the University of the West Indies. This government has demonstrated, not just by saying, but by doing, that we are supportive of the University of the West Indies. And in doing so, we have demonstrated that we are supportive of the legitimate ambitions of our people, especially our young people and their families, who aspire to be more than they are and more than they can imagine in some instances, and an opportunity is being provided for them to actualize those ambitions. We have seen, Mr. President, globally, leaders emerging. We have heard people speaking about Barbados in glowing terms in many instances. We have seen, Mr. President, inspiring leaders emerge here in Barbados and all across the globe. And we are inspiring our own young people to dream, to believe, and to know that there is a government who is going to support those ambitions with sound and meaningful investments in entities like the University of the West Indies. Let me just make it clear, Mr. President, the government of Barbados is not spending money on a loan. We are not absorbing a loan. We are simply guaranteeing the University of the West Indies, who is the entity going forward for the loan, that they will repay both the principal and the interest, and in so doing, that they will contribute to the digitalization and the transformation digitally of this functional corporation institution as a flagship institution in the region, and in so doing, that they will be supporting Caribbean development, Caribbean civilization, and Caribbean young people. And with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this resolution do now pass.
Thank you, Senator Cummings. Floor is now open. Recognize Senator Boyce.
Thank you for recognizing me, Mr. Acting President. I stand to support the resolution before the Chamber, and I do so with particular pride as a three-time graduate of the University of the West Indies, and as someone who recognizes the fundamental importance and value of that institution to regional development, and to the value of our society, and the value and the role that the institution plays, rather, in the development of minds across the region and the setting of not only Barbados's agenda, but the agenda of countries across the region. Mr. President, as indicated by the Leader of Government Business, this loan guarantee is but part of the commitment of this administration to the development of education and the continued modernization of education. And Senator Cummings went through the long and storied trajectory of the Barbados Labour Party, supporting the continued expansion of the University of the West Indies, particularly at Cave Hill, but across the region as well. And so I won't thread there. One of the things about this resolution that interests me most is the focus on gender mainstreaming and an appreciation that as we digitize and as we seek to make access to democratize the access to digital services and products and modernize the University of the West Indies, that gender is an important component. And throughout the program, there are tenets of gender and an appreciation for how we need to take a gender lens to programmatic development, Mr. President, Mr. Acting President, so that when the program talks about the development of a gendered business plan, when it talks about ensuring that there is greater equity across the genders, as the University of the West Indies endeavors to digitize and endeavors to modernize, I think the University of the West Indies, the government of Barbados, and the Caribbean Development Bank ought to be celebrated for that, Mr. President, because all things are not equal, and I think COVID is the perfect illustration of that point. We have seen throughout the span of COVID the inequity that this government and others across the region, with the contribution of private individuals and philanthropic entities, have sought to remedy, Mr. Acting President. But as we seek to as the University of the West Indies seeks to modernize, there must be an appreciation, and I'm glad there is, that that we need to find structural ways to address the inequities. And so it is for that reason that I support the resolution. Mr. President, I also wish to focus on the student experience, and the student experience particularly outside the classroom. The tutelage in the classrooms at the University of the West Indies across all of the campuses is in some way is celebrated and is in some way second to none. But this loan and this loan guarantee provides an opportunity for us to evaluate and to assess business and business processes, Mr. President, service and service delivery, and a modernization of those processes. And one of the critiques of the University of the West Indies has been in the past that it has not modernized those processes, that service delivery outside the classroom is still defined by protracted waits and paper-based service delivery and all of the things that have the ability to frustrate the university's clients. And so I am pleased that this resolution and the program attendant to this resolution will address some of those things. Because if the University of the West Indies is to remain the relevant institution that we all need it to remain, if it is to remain the competitive institution that we all need it to, in some ways, become and in other ways remain, then it has to grapple with these questions of modernization. It has to grapple with how best it delivers services to its students and to its clients more broadly. Mr. President, we're having this conversation about this resolution and the modernization of the University of the West Indies when these are questions, the questions of modernization, are questions that across the Caribbean at a regional level we are all grappling with. And so this resolution and the support of the government of this initiative is not in the abstract, because in government, in this administration, we too are seeking to modernize and to better the processes, to digitize processes and to increase access to processes and to make them more modern. So that this is really an investment not only in the University of the West Indies, but an investment in our societies in its broadest sense, because it is part of the broad aim of this administration, and I imagine many others across the region, to make our societies more digital, more modern, more fit for purpose. Mr. President. The climate of the context and climate of education demands, Mr. President, that we do things differently, that we modernize, that we deliver services in a cutting-edge way to a generation of students unlike any other, a generation of students who walk around with technological devices, who are au fait with the cutting edge of service delivery. And so it becomes imperative that the University of the West Indies, as the transformational institution that it is, grapples with those things. But also, Mr. President, that in the grappling with those things, that we ensure as great a level of democratization as possible. And by that I mean, I want to encourage the University of the West Indies, particularly as a person with a disability, to ensure that the products and services that they deliver attendant to this program and all of them are accessible to persons with disabilities. Very often we think about technological services and we think immediately that they will be open and accessible to persons with disabilities. And it takes deliberate intervention, it takes thought to ensure that these things are indeed accessible to persons with disabilities. So that while I absolutely endorse the resolution and the attendant program, I wish to encourage the University of the West Indies to be deliberate in their action, not only under this program, but in the delivery of all of their services to ensure that students, particularly the blind and deaf and those of us with fine motor challenges, have easy access to the services of the University of the West Indies, and that we don't make more challenging that which is already challenging. With those very few words, sir, I wish to commend the resolution and to the chamber and to give it my full support. I'm obliged to you.
Thank you, Senator Boyce. I recognize Senator Roberts.
Thank you so much, Mr. Acting President. Today, I will say I'm going to keep this as brief as possible because a lot of what needed to be said has been covered in most eloquent terms. But for me, similar to my colleague, I have a certain amount of pride when it comes to talking about the University of the West Indies. So I feel as though I need to vocalize a few things. And they'll be surrounding three main areas that I want to just move through quickly because they're important, Mr. Acting President. The importance of the University of the West Indies to the Caribbean people and to Barbadians specifically. The importance of the University of the West Indies to Caribbean governments and societies. And change or die. So we talked a lot about how the university itself has impacted Caribbean people. The reality is, coming out of our previous existence, we were agrarian society. Some may argue some of us are still exceptionally agrarian, which is a good thing in some contexts. But when we started to move forward and to push ourselves onto the global stage, we recognized that we needed to fill the gaps that some of our colonial masters may have left in becoming an actualized society and governing ourselves. So part of what the role that University of the West Indies has played is allowing individuals in the Caribbean to be able to actualize themselves, to be able to not just vision and envision something that you see on a movie or something that you saw on TV, but say to yourself, you could never get there. It allowed you to understand there was an avenue for you to go there and to be there. It allowed you to understand that you did not have to rely upon someone that came from over and the way. Your lawyer could be one of your own fellow countrymen who stayed here, who went to school here, who was actualized and crystallized here, and who is able to provide you with a service that you needed here, who understood your cultural context. Cultural context is important. It is fundamental, because in order for you to properly represent me, whether as my lawyer, as my doctor, you have to understand who I am, understand the way that I think. And fundamentally, the University of the West Indies has allowed many, many Caribbean people the ability to grow and to enhance themselves while still maintaining who they are and where they've come from. On a societal basis, as I indicated, the University of the West Indies allowed Barbados to be able to grow and develop in ways that are, in sometimes, I think, beyond what our original framers thought possible. We have been able to have Nobel laureates and persons of economic, political, and social gravitas who have made impacts worldwide, and they've come from the University of the West Indies. That does not mean they have not studied in other places, but a lot of their first impetus, that first spark of who they could be and how they were forming their thoughts, came from the University of the West Indies. And that is not something that can be trivialized or should ever be marked and put aside. The University of the West Indies has always truthfully had been criticized, internally and externally. Some of it valid and some of it not so valid. I myself, even though I am a proud UWI student, I'm willing to tell you I was one of those students who was protesting the raise in university's fees when I was at university, the raise of the amenities fees. Was one of those in the crowd banging on the principal's door for him to come outside and answer questions. But the reality is, the university is one of those institutions that has and continues to grow and shape who we are, not just as a Barbadian people, but as a Caribbean people. It is one of sometimes the first places where Barbadians and other students get the opportunity to live in a close context with our neighbors, to truly get a taste of what integration looks like and feels like. It's where you start to see those little things that people talk about, you know? It's where you start to learn to get over a bias that you may have, known that you had or not had. It is where you start to really learn what it is to work together. I can tell you there are many of us who have an array of horror stories about group projects, to which our cultural context and our different understandings sometimes created mountains that you had to learn to traverse. You had to learn to understand and empathize and get that your Jamaican friend did not necessarily think the way you thought, or your Trinidadian friend didn't, but you still had that project to deliver, so you still found a way to work together. It's important not just because it educates us in a formal intellectual way, it educates us in a social way, and an understanding that we then have the ability to take out into the wider society and to not necessarily fall back into original preconceived notions, because you've now had the ability to reach across the table and work together. You now know it is possible and not just some airy-fairy concept that is pushed from places beyond you. So there is importance to the university from a Caribbean context, from a university and societal context. But one of the most fundamental things that I saw when I read this bill, and it harkens back continuously, because the university of 20 years ago is not the university of 10 years ago, it's not the university of today, and it shall not be the university of tomorrow. The concept of change or die is fundamental. It's fundamental to businesses, it's fundamental to societal organizations, and it is fundamental to societies. In another life, I have a boss who outside of his door, there's a sign that says, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. I am proud of the fact that we have brought this bill here, this resolution here today. I am proud of it because it gives me that confidence that the university continues to understand the idea of change or die, that the university, while it has continuously, I can speak for the time that I was there, made improvements towards digitization, made improvements towards embracing and accepting technologies, made improvements towards the democratization of education. This resolution goes even further. This resolution gives the university and proves that the university has understood I think from itself and its transformational trajectory, strategic plan, but also from what would have happened in COVID, that the democratization of education continues to need to be pushed. Those boundaries have to be expanded, and that the university is responsible for making sure that it doesn't just stop with, oh, well, in some cases, anybody can go to university. Does the university make itself available? Does it democratize in a way that any and everybody has an opportunity to take up what is put on the table? Because it is easy to say, well, at least for Barbadians, you know, university is free. And I find that, you know, it's fine to say, but it isn't necessarily free in that context. And I say that having had to be the person who worked all of my summer vacation to be able to afford books and go to university for next semester, to be able to afford those amenities fees and those extra fees that the government does not cover. I say that understanding that I am a child of a woman who did not have the opportunity to go to university. And I can tell you, I always thought to myself, my mother's brain is amazing. You should be at university instead of me. But I also knew that her constant goal was work, because work provided food, work put a roof over your head, work allowed her to see me excel. And I'm excited about what this represents, because the plan that has been put before us says that the university intends to be able to allow more opportunities for those working persons to be able to electronically attend classes, to be able to grow and change and have an opportunity to be there, even if they can't physically be there. And that is one of the blessings of COVID. I think we all said when COVID started and during COVID, well, we can't go back to the way things were. I hope that we understand that we have to be able to open up these doors. And the reality is, a lot of times, from what we've seen, people have fallen back to the way that things were before COVID, because it is easy, because it is comfortable. So I myself am absolutely happy to see that the university is not, because it could. The university could well rest on its laurels. As I said, they've produced heads of state. They've produced economic and social giants of thought. They've produced musical and cultural icons. So I must say that I wholeheartedly support this resolution, because I also wholeheartedly support the idea that we cannot go back to the way things were. When you see that you can do better, then you are under an obligation to do better. So I commend the university for that. But I also want to commend this government. I want to commend this government because we could easily take the position that, you know what? When we came back to government, we said we will take the burden. We will continue to do what previous administrations, except the last one, did, and ensure that Barbadians have opportunities to be at the University of West Indies as much as the reduced cost, well, free. And the reality of the situation is, it has not been an easy task. I find sometimes there's this idea that, oh, that was easy, that was a magic wand that was waved and the problem was solved, and, you know, but there were real economic and considerations that happened. In order to do X, Y has to be paused, or you have to find other sources of funds to do Y. So when you have a situation in which a government continues to invest in its people, continues to say, no, we will bear the burden because you must be allowed to have the opportunity, that is critical. So I want to say that I absolutely commend this government for insisting and ensuring that we bring this resolution to allow for that continued democratization of education to happen, and not just at Cave Hill, but throughout the UWI system. So on those very, very short points, sir, thank you so much. I am obliged.
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Chair recognizes Senator Nurse.
Thank Thank you, Mr. Acting President. I shan't be very long, but I couldn't miss upon this opportunity to speak to this resolution and to say a few words on the University of the West Indies. You know, Mr. President, the University of the West Indies is easily, by and large, one of the very most outstanding institutions that have been created in the Caribbean, and which has redounded to the benefit of all of us throughout the Caribbean region. And I think that if you think about it, a number of prime ministers who now leave the countries in this region have been schooled and educated at the University of the West Indies. A number of government ministers throughout all of these territories have had the benefit of that university education. I dare say if we were to do a poll in this Senate right now, we would find that a number of these of the senators would also have had that opportunity. And, you know, Mr. Acting President, the University of the West Indies is, I said it's one of the outstanding institutions in this Caribbean region. But in actual fact, in terms of universities throughout the world, we know that the University of the West Indies ranked in the top 600 universities around the world. And in terms of this Caribbean and Latin American region, it ranks among the top 40. So outstanding progress, growth, improvements, achievements have been made by this institution over the years. And therefore, I think it is important that we continue to support it, because when you analyze it, you recognize how important it has been to the development and growth of the region. And one of the things I wanted to say as well is that I am glad to see that the university is moving away from an entire dependence financially from financing by the governments in the region. And they've reached the stage where they can go out, where they're going out and they can raise their own financing, in this case, through loans funds from the Caribbean Development Bank. They have been able to attract international students and in that way raise revenue for their recurring expenditure and for financing the recurring costs of the university. So this is the direction that I think the university has got to be going, and to be reducing their dependence on the Caribbean governments. And, you know, we all have to accept that the governments in the region, you know, more and more are in the situation, particularly in these difficult times, where resources have to be stretched, you know, to support the economies, and therefore, more and more, they will probably have to reduce their contributions to the university. So I'm glad to see this movement towards self-sufficiency and self-financing, if you wish to call it that, on behalf by the university. One of the areas, though, which I think the university also should be concentrating on, I'm not sure that I've seen it, perhaps it is happening, but I am thinking of its alumni. I just mentioned how important and the amount of the great contribution it has made in terms of educating the Caribbean people. And I think that it has to do more in terms of getting that alumni on board and supporting the university on a regular basis in terms of financing or helping to finance the university's operations. Some of us would not necessarily have gone to the University of the West Indies, but we would have gone further afield to North America, to UK, and so on. And I can tell you that once you have gone through those universities, they keep at you. They are always there. They're always sending out correspondence. They're always communicating with their alumni, encouraging them to contribute, to give scholarships, to do whatever they can to see that the universities, those universities continue to be as successful. And some of them have done it, so successfully that the large portion of their funding comes through that network of alumni and those connections. And therefore, I think these are the areas also that the university going forward should be looking to see how they can tap in on those sources to also assist with their financing. Mr. Acting President, there's just one other issue that I wanted to touch on, and this is not the university itself, but a part of the university. I speak of the UWI Open campus. And within recent times, you have seen various, releases, various news items in the press, which tend to suggest that all is not well financially and maybe otherwise at that UWI campus. And you hear stories or you read stories about tutors not receiving their salaries and emoluments on a timely basis, sometimes 1-2 months in advance. I know I saw pretty recently where I understand the government of Barbados, for example, had to actually give an advance so that the university would have money for the open campus. So I don't know, I don't know what exactly are the issues, because they have not really been ventilated in a way that we, the public, understand what the problems are and how they're going to be corrected. But I would like to see, or I would like to hear, what the issues are, and as we move forward, what will be the proposals to deal with those various issues. Because again, the Open University has also been a significant contributor to the education in the Caribbean. And in Barbados, a lot of civil servants and other persons, a lot of people in the private sector have gone through the Open University. And therefore, I am saying that it is something that probably needs to be supported, needs to be analyzed, needs to see where the issues are, and to make sure that as we move forward, that is also taken into account to ensure the sustainability and the continuity of that particular campus. And so, Mr. Acting President, it is my very good pleasure to be able to support this resolution, and I wish that the university will continue to make the excellent and outstanding contributions that it has been making to this region as they go forward. I am obliged to you, Mr. Deputy President.
Thank you, Senator Nurse. Chair recognizes Senator Dr. Brathwaite.
Thank you very much, Mr. Acting President. I too rise in support of this resolution, which in my view clearly seeks fundamentally to move our university further into the 21st century and to enhance the capacity of the institution to deliver the products that are necessary for modernization in this new global world. The ability of the university to help our countries explore digital technologies is an important step forward. I see the need for this approach as we seek to provide our young people with the tools necessary to be competitive, not only in the Caribbean, but any place in the world. We hope that the university will use this opportunity to develop a new generation of students competent in information technologies, both in software and in hardware. Students who can be part of a new digital world and who must use the opportunities to explore new employment opportunities and to generate wealth. I have always contended, Mr. President, Acting President, that the university must not only produce and graduate students, but that the university must itself engage in the promotion and the development of enterprises that can in fact help to employ those students that are trained. And I hope the university will take advantage of this loan, not only to train the new generation of students, but to invest in digital technology that can generate enterprises such as e-commerce, e-learning, e-translation services that in fact can help to provide employment opportunities for our people so that the university will in fact be contributing not only to education in the narrow sense, but to development as a strategic role which I think any university in the 21st century must play. I also hope, Mr. Acting President, that the university will use this opportunity and these funds to promote modernization and increase efficiency in its operations and delivery of services to the member states. The exploration of the digital platform must be used to promote greater regional integration, greater regional cooperation, and support the concept of an integrated Caribbean society. I believe, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, that this represents an important platform going forward, and we all look forward to the university continuing to play a strategic role in fostering modernization, efficiency, and greater productivity in the context of Caribbean integration. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brathwaite. And the chair now recognizes Dr. Senator Dr. Monroe Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Acting President. I'm very happy, as most of the other colleagues have indicated, to be standing and supporting this resolution. Certainly, discussions, debates around tertiary education, and particularly the University of the West Indies, is particularly close to my heart. I've done my first degree at the university, as well as my master's, and I was also fortunate for a period of time to be a part-time lecturer at the university. So that this is not something that is, esoteric or some things in which I perhaps can divorce my own emotions, Mr. Acting President, from, because it is something that for me is very personal. And it is very personal, Mr. Acting President, because, again, as the leader of government business would have alluded to, and I believe as well, Senator Roberts Odell, the notion of free education and free tertiary education is something that for most of us who grew up in poor households was an indelible part of our understanding that this was critical to advancement, that it was critical to nation building. I have a very early memory, and it is one of the most poignant memories I have very early of my dad. So I can't remember much of, the very early times, but I do remember sitting on a chair and my dad in front of me delivering a lecture about the importance of education and wagging his finger at me to let me know that with education and through education, that as a poor girl growing up in a community, I grew up on a block, it was called Redbeard, where times were difficult, and particularly in the context of a single-parent household and a father who was also self-employed, that education was going to be the fundamental key to advancement. And such throughout all of my educational pursuits, that stayed with me at the back of my mind, that notion that education and advancement was intricately linked. But my father's urgings were done also within the context of him reminding me that free education and free tertiary education was also delivered within a political context. So it was very much associated with the legacy of Errol Barrow. And so again, I grew up understanding that the privilege of free education and free tertiary education was tied to an ideal espoused by Errol Barrow in the context of the then Democratic Labour Party. And I've been very deliberate, Mr. Acting President, to say the then Democratic Labour Party, because certainly the Democratic Labour Party of Errol Barrow is certainly not the same the Democratic Labour Party that we have today. And so within that context, Mr. Acting President, of understanding that education and advancement was linked, I also understood not only at a personal level, but nationally as well, Mr. Acting President, that there was an understanding that education for citizens was a fundamental principle that we understood very much, that investing in education for our people was significant to the nation-building project, that it meant that we were reversing that colonial history of denial of rights and particularly of education, and basing our country on the exact opposite, that we will be able to deliver education and ensure that our citizens would have access, that every black boy and every black girl or brown that
lives in this country, regardless of the circumstance, would be able to access education. It was a fundamental principle as I understood it, Mr. Acting President. That is what I understood. So that when the Democratic Labour Party, ironically, the party that calls itself the party of the people, the party of the people, Mr. President, in 2014, in the midst, yes, of economic difficulties, decided that they would place that very ethos and privilege that we had as a country, that understanding, that fundamental understanding of the importance of education, and they would place it up on the altar and deny, through their action and policy, the opportunity for Barbadians to be able to access, again, tertiary education free. Mr. President, it was a pain and a betrayal that I felt personally. It was a fundamental repudiation, Mr. Acting President, of that very independence ethos that we knew as Barbadians. It was a hurt because it felt to me like the Democratic Labour Party of the people had forgotten the people. They had forgotten the people and sought, therefore, to kick down the very ladder that many of them, including, God rest his soul, former Prime Minister David Thompson, who also studied at the University of the West Indies, kicked down the ladder, many of them, including the then Minister of Finance, kicked down the ladder for us, because I will tell you that there would have been no way for my single-parent, self-employed father to be able to afford for me to go to university had I had to pay even partial tuition. There were many times, Mr. Acting President, that I had sufficient bus fare only to catch one bus so the University Hill was my friend. You hear? A red drink, a juicy, and a small packet tea times is what I had for lunch many times. And I got there because of that investment in free education, so that when in 2014, the Democratic Labour Party took it away, it was for me, for this country, saying that they did not understand, that they did not care, that there was no principle born in that party. Because if there was no way that they would have sacrificed that very fundamental privilege for Barbadians. The fact that this Barbados Labour Party in 2018, as one of the fundamental and first things that it did was to restore that, demonstrates exactly the opposite. The Barbados Labour Party came into government at a time when this country was on its knees in the context of debt and the destruction that was wrought socially, economically, all across Barbados because of the policies of the Democratic Labour Party. And even in the midst of that, it said, we will not sacrifice education and free tertiary education for its people, and restored it. It was a recognition that there are some things that have to be sacred for the development of this country, that the national development project must be based on its people and the education of its people. It was a recognition, Mr. Acting President, that the project that our fathers, the same Errol Walton Barrow and Tom Adams, invested in, must be one that we ensure that our generations understood and could benefit from. The restoration, Mr. Acting President, was a recognition that the party quite ironically, that is called the party of the elite. Because if that was so, the elite don't need the free education, you know. They could afford to pay and send their children on a plane to go anywhere, but it was this Barbados Labour Party, ironically, the party that was called the party of the elite that came into government, and the first thing in 2018 was to say, we will restore the fundamental privilege and right. And it therefore is amazing for me, Mr. Acting President, that we have now a current leader of the opposition who all about the place talking about this government don't care about poor people. I would like that current president, who's my friend, and will always be my friend, we grew up together in the youth sector, to make sure that when he looks in the mirror, that he sees the reflection of the party that he now leads. He cannot now come in and divorce himself from the destruction that his party delivered to this country. He cannot now come and divorce himself from the fact that his party removed that very fundamental privilege for Barbadians and now talking about this government don't care about poor people. Democratic Labour Party, none of them never apologized, never said to Barbadians, sorry, never said, never once to the people like me, to people like other people in here whose children also need to be able to benefit, never once came and apologized and said, we're sorry, we make a mistake, and this is why we are here, Mr. Acting President. This is why we are in the state, because the people of Barbados said to them, you're wrong, and we don't trust you. You're wrong, and we don't trust you, because there was a recognition, again, that learning, we all know the word learning, that learning, getting education, and free education was one of the fundamental principles. Mr. President, Acting President, I have had the privilege of traveling all across the globe. And one of the things that Barbados is always envied for is the ability to provide that free education up to tertiary levels. It's one of the reasons why we stand out amongst other small island developing states. It is because of our people. It is because of the fact that that has been so ingrained into us that we continue to be able to excel. It is that reason why our human resource is now sought all over. Why Barbadians can go to work anywhere in the world is because of that sound educational basis, because of that access to education. Mr. Acting President, I actually want to read, Mr. President, if you permit me, from the Beckles Commission report on higher education in 2012. That report said, the philosophy underlying the policies of governments to publicly fund tertiary education is that the investment is an important instrument in the social and economic transformation of the country. It provides equality of opportunity for individuals to socially advance and play a significant role in the life of the community by enhancing their participation in political and social institutions. There are a myriad of academic studies, Mr. Acting President, that point to the negative correlation between higher education and poor households. Basically, the higher level of education that your people can attain, it is very unlikely that you would have a very high amount of very poor, because education provides skills and knowledge which can be used for social advancement. That is the academic studies, even though we don't need anybody to tell us that because we know it. The literature says that to us, so that a small, developing country with limited resources, that investment is fundamental. I also want to indicate as well that in the context of the government, when I speak to the government, the Barbados Labour Party's reinstitution of the free tertiary education, that our approach has always been to face it and fix it and do not run from the challenge. Yeah? Face it and fix it and do not run from the challenge. So that this government has continued to invest in strengthening the educational institutions and in educational reforms. So that while, again, in 2014, we had a government who ran from the challenge, this Barbados Labour Party is saying we will face it and fix it in the context of ensuring that we are able to provide quality education for everyone at all levels to be able to access. So, Mr. Acting President, I also want to reiterate that we have much to be proud of in the context of our university. Similar to Senator Nurse, I also noted as well that actually in 2022, UWI was ranked actually the #1 position in the Caribbean, in the top 1% of the best in Latin America and the Caribbean, and now stands in the top 1.5% of universities in the world. And that was up from 3% in 2021. We have much to be proud of in the context of our university and what it produces. In that context, I want to take the opportunity to publicly commend the outstanding faculty within our university. Certainly, there are many of those faculty at Cave Hill that were important to my own development. I can speak to Professor Neville Duncan, Dr. Charles Bell, as well as Professor Cynthia Barra-Giles. And I want as well, if you can permit me just a second, Mr. Acting President, to also single out Professor Cynthia Barra-Giles, who from me, mentored me to some extent, and then was very instrumental in me coming on board at university as a part-time lecturer. And it speaks to the fact that the university environment is an environment in which you are nurtured, in which you are able to have debates and have yourself stretched. And again, we can speak, and I spoke about the previous leader of the Democratic Labour Party, but there have been a number of prime ministers regionally that have passed through the University of the West Indies. We, especially more, well, you have a biased leader of government business. We have Bruce Golden from Jamaica, Dennis Douglas from St. Kitts and Nevis, Ralph Gonzalez, Kamala Prasad, perhaps not Mona. So that we have a university that produces the very best, Owen Arthur, the very best, Mr. Acting President. So that we are assured that within our university, that we are able to provide a sound education. At the same time, Mr. Acting President, that I say that, we must also be assured that we do not rest on our laurels and that we continue to have a university that is fit for purpose. That is critical. That is fit for purpose. As was said before, the university that we had in my day and would have operated in the day of some of the other senators here, and particularly in Mona, the environment has changed. The environment has changed. The COVID-19 pandemic showed for all of us that we needed to reform and we needed to change and we needed to upgrade. But at the same time, Mr. Acting President, I do want to say that the challenges facing the University of the West Indies were not challenges only brought about in the context of the COVID-19. There were challenges that were plaguing the university for some time. There have been numerous reports that have showed that the university is challenged in a number of ways institutionally that needs to be updated. There was an eminent commission, Mr. Acting President, I hope I can find it, that was chaired by, I think it was Dr. Byron. I'm gonna find it, no, sorry. The Honorable Sir Dennis Byron. And he was appointed in 2018 in order to look, along with a commission, at the transformation of the UWI. And one of the critical things that came out of that was the fact that the university was underperforming in the context of its application of ICT technologies to improving how it was operating. And that commission also identified a number of other fault lines. So it is extremely important, a number of other fault lines at the institutional level, so that we have, in the context of this loan, if you look at it as a leader of government, business did, one of the fundamental areas that will be assisted is in relation to institutional building and also institutional strengthening and capacity building in order to be able to strengthen the processes. Because it is not just about ICT and applying ICT, because we can apply technology, but if we do not know how to use it to teach, then we create other problems. If we do not apply the technology appropriately, you create other problems. If we do not have proper management and oversight, we create other problems. Mr. Acting President, my daughter in the first year of doing economics, and particularly in the context of when it was online. So unfortunately, everybody else in the household sometimes was privy to her ongoing classes and the challenges thereof. And sometimes you would hear for 2 hours she's in a class with a lecturer who is just going on and on and on and on. And I would come in the room, my daughter would be on her phone, footlock, and I would be saying, but you weren't paying attention? And she would say, but she's been going on and on for the past 2 hours, reading from the book, and therefore I don't necessarily have to listen. I could read the book after and get the recording. So that the need to ensure that there is the application of the correct teaching methodologies in terms of how to apply the technology to make it interactive becomes important as well, Mr. Acting President. And therefore, it is hoped, as was indicated in the 2020 Commission report that I alluded to, that this loan would be able to help the university to address some of those fundamental underlying issues in order to make it fit for purpose in the context of the world that we live in and beyond. We've also heard criticisms in terms of the quality of students that are coming out of university from the private sector as well, indicating that there needs to be a more robust approach to teaching, etc. And again, the application of this loan is important. My final point, Mr. Acting President, relates to the issue of alternative financing for the University of the West Indies, and I will remind this honourable chamber that one of the other policies of this government is that 5% of renewable energy technologies has been reserved for regional institutions, and it therefore provides an additional source of income for UWI Cave Hill so that they can benefit from that investment and then also as well be able to have another source of financing. So that this government is not only about providing the economic resources for the students to be able to participate, but because we understand the need for strengthening for the long term, essentially building resilience, we are making another important investment. And Mr. President, there are those who would believe that in order for us to deal with the problems facing us, that we must stand in the middle of Bridgetown like Pied Piper and tell everybody line up for this wad of money. This government is not doing that. This government understands that resilience building is something that is complex. It is something that requires a holistic investment. And therefore, it is working with the University of the West Indies to ensure that all levels, it provides the necessary resources and assistance in order to ensure that all of us my generation to come, can participate in a university that is strong and resilient. Thank you, Mr. Acting President.
Thank you, Senator Monroe Knight, Leader of the Government Business.
Thank you very much, Mr. Acting President. And I want to first of all express the appreciation of the government for all of the persons who spoke earlier. We have, first of all, Senator Andrea Boyce, who gave a very detailed outline from his own perspective and raised several important issues as it relates to the provision of services that make it student-friendly and promote the ability for the university to interact with its students, who are obviously its primary demographic group, and that is absolutely critical. Senator Shanika Roberts-Odle also spoke, and I think I also would want to align myself with those comments, especially from the perspective of regional integration. I mean, I talk about the University of the West Indies at Mona campus, not just with affection because of my campus or of my hall, but Mr. President, I went to University of the West Indies at a time, and I don't know if Senator Walcott had that experience, where on Thursday afternoons, every Thursday afternoon after 1 o'clock, there were no formal classes being taught. We had an environment where, as Caribbean students and as students at the Mona campus, we were encouraged to immerse ourselves in the cultural environment in which we were living, and we had every stage show, every cultural activity. The Creative Arts Center at the Mona campus was always a hive of activity. There were craft shows, Mr. President, and that began the immersion of many of us who went through the University of the West Indies at Mona into our region and into our environment. As a matter of fact, the student associations, the Barbados Association, all of the others, and just like you, Senator Roberts-Odle, it's an interesting thing. I recall myself being a protester, locking down the University of the West Indies Mona campus, protesting the increases of fees, which did not apply to us as Barbadian students, but we stood in solidarity with our regional counterparts to whom it did. And that was very much the nature of the Mona campus and the University of the West Indies, which fostered that regional integration. And some of my closest and dearest friends to this day remain scattered all across the world, because they were regional graduates of the University of the West Indies. And that has been perhaps one of the greatest outputs of the University of the West Indies, forging that sense of regional oneness, that sense of regional identity. And I don't think I realized I was a Barbadian with a Barbadian accent until I was at Mona campus and I realized what my accent sounded like against other Caribbean nationals. And that really became a very critical part of who we were. We also had Senator Dr. Brathwaite in his comments speaking about the importance of professional development and incorporating entrepreneurial development. And I'm very proud that the University of the West Indies, we have the SEED program, which has been long-standing. It's been in the University of West Indies arsenal promoting entrepreneurship, student entrepreneurship, for a very, very long time. And also, while I was still in the university, for the first time, the University of the West Indies appointed a pro-vice-chancellor with responsibility for entrepreneurship and innovation. And that was meant to be streamlined across all campuses. And I think perhaps, as I listened to some of the comments, including those which were raised by Senator Nurse, which talked about the importance of financing the university and so on, that the university perhaps, and I make this call to the university again publicly, needs to do perhaps a better job of telling its own story. The university needs to be able to, one, share with the public some of its challenges. It needs to share with its demographic base some of the important work that it is doing. Because when you talk about persons like Senator Dr. Monroe Knight, who served as a part-time lecturer at the University of the West Indies, the reality of it is that you have a number of full-time academic faculty that constitute the basis of the teaching and learning apparatus of the University of the West Indies. But if we were to look at what happens around the globe in places like Canada and other places where professionals who are practitioners in their field and not academics alone who have been committed to a lifetime of teaching and publishing, but persons who are practitioners in their own right, who go back into the University of the West Indies on a part-time basis and impart that real-world, practical, business-oriented and development-oriented knowledge to students, that has been a critical component. And while we talk all the time, Mr. Acting President, about the important and the devastating impact of the removal of tuition fees from the university in that period in 2014 and how it affected students. The reality also is, Mr. President, Mr. Acting President, that many of those part-time lecturers, many of those persons who were professionals bringing real-world professional experience to bear in the lives of students to enrich their development experience, those persons also went home, and a lot of those programs ended at the University of the West Indies because there simply was not the budget to support that. And that also impacted our students' learning experience and their classroom experience. And may there never be a day in our history where a government of Barbados puts young people and the future of our development on the front line by cutting budgets to the University of the West Indies, where our students are either unable to access the university or alternately, persons are not able to benefit from the best of all the resources that are made available through the University of the West Indies to support Caribbean development. Now, finally, you heard Senator Nurse speaking about the financial circumstances facing the University of the West Indies and some of the challenges that are there, Mr. President. Again, I say that the University of the West Indies needs to perhaps use its communication apparatus to make a case for itself in the public space. Now, Senator Dr. Monroe Knight spoke in particular about lecturers who impacted her, and I too have many of those, certainly at the Mona campus of the University of West Indies and also in my master's program at the Cave Hill campus. But I want on this occasion, Mr. President, to single out the leadership, the visionary leadership of the Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, Sir Hilary Beckles, an iconic Barbadian leader who has positioned the University of the West Indies not for all the things that we have seen him do only as principal of the Cave Hill campus, not for all the publications alone that he has contributed to support Caribbean development and its sense of its identity and the evolution of its civilization, but I want also, Mr. President, to celebrate him today for his commitment to social justice. And what do I mean social justice? The University of the West Indies is an institution that we have all recognized supports social inclusion, creates a platform for persons who otherwise would not be able to access tertiary level education, people who come from all kinds of backgrounds and who would not be able to access a future without access to that education, Mr. President. Because the reality of it is, look, they got enough people in this country, Mr. Acting President, who come from middle and upper middle income families, who are able to go overseas to university, who are able to go to the schools of their choosing because their families are able to support, and there are those who can care less what happens to those who have to go to the University of the West Indies because the government has supported that. Because there is no interest, it doesn't affect them personally. But the reality of it is that the majority of Barbadians, including people like Senator Monroe Knight, who outlined her own personal experience, and others, Senator Boyce and others, who would not be standing in these halls or who would not have ascended to the leadership of countries across this region had there not been an investment in the University of the West Indies. But, Mr. President, I come to the role played by the Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies. Had he not had a commitment to social justice, whereby whatever contributions were paid into the University of the West Indies, because we, people like to tell me I like to weave. I can't sew, but people like to say I like to weave threads. We must never see the world through silos. One thing is connected to the next thing. And a University of the West Indies that has been in arrears, has been facing arrears from regional governments for an extended period of time, is going to have challenges with its own financial position. There is no way to separate the two things, and I want us to always be able to connect the acknowledgement on the one hand that there were significant arrears owed to the University of the West Indies, and on the other hand, the financial position. We cannot hold up the university to say it is not in the best financial position without also acknowledging where its financial base comes from at the same time, and our role in supporting that financial base as governments. I am proud, and I think all of us in here have spoken about it, to be a part of a government, certainly on the government side, that has continued not only to support the University of the West Indies by way of students, but has stepped in instances where the University of the West Indies has found itself in difficulty, and either by way of doing things like we're doing today, guaranteeing loans through the Caribbean Development Bank to ensure that it is able to develop, that we are also able simultaneously, Mr. President, to do things like vesting lands, which help to improve the balance sheet of the University of the West Indies because it is still a private institution, and in order for the university to be able to borrow funds on the open market or from commercial banks, it has to have a healthy balance sheet. And unpaid arrears over an extended period of time will impact on the University of the West Indies balance sheet and its ability to borrow. And so all of these are things, Mr. President, that we cannot view in a vacuum when we talk about the financial position of the University of the West Indies because they are all connected. I am committed to supporting my university. All of us in here who have passed through those halls have clearly made it public. We are committed to supporting our university. The Barbados Labour Party has demonstrated by its words and by its actions that we are committed to supporting the University of the West Indies. And this latest resolution before us, Mr. President, is a tangible demonstration of the continued commitment, not the lip service, the continued commitment, tangible commitment of this administration to supporting the University of the West Indies. And with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this resolution do now pass.
Thank you, Senator Cummings. The question is that this resolution now pass. Honorable members in favor, please say yes. Aye. Aye. Thank you. All honorable members against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Acting President, order number 4, in the name of the Honorable Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of the resolution to approve, in accordance with Section 5 of the Crown Lands Vesting and Disposal Act, Chapter 225, the vesting of parcels of land situated at Sergeant Village in the Parsons Christ Church in this island, mainly for public purpose, namely housing development.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. This is a simple resolution, but it is an important resolution. Again, Mr. President, we are speaking here in this instance about approximately 7,000 square meters of land at Sergeant Village in Christchurch. We are investing in the National Housing Corporation, Mr. President, that land. And why would we be doing this, Mr. President, today? I don't think that there is a single conversation that is as current in this country as the importance of providing housing. Mr. President, we just finished up a debate where we were discussing the importance of the right of access to education. Barbados has become the country in the world for the first time to also speak about the importance as a small island developing state facing a climate crisis to be able to guarantee the right of access to renewable energy. And Mr. President, the most fundamental of all rights that we have enshrined both in local legislation as a result of our international commitments is the right to shelter, the right to adequate housing. And this Barbados Labour Party has accepted that certainly up until the time we came to office in 2018, there had not been a significant investment in housing transformation for an extended period of time. While houses were built, Mr. President, there were generations-long, decades-long lists at the National Housing Corporation of tens of thousands of Barbadians on a list waiting for a long time to be able to get a home, Mr. President. We subsequently had Barbadians who thereafter, aside from waiting for homes already, who were also unable to qualify through commercial banks to be able to get mortgages. Mr. President, every person, every Barbadian wants to be able to own what we call anecdotally a piece of the rock. Everybody wants to own their own. Prime Minister has spoken about rent as dead money. You are effectively paying somebody else's mortgage. People want to be able to own their home. They want to be able to speak to the question of generational access, generational wealth. They want to be able to own a home and leave that home when they pass on to their children. They want to be able to help their children and their grandchildren invest in their first home. And so, Mr. President, this is as fundamental to who we are as a people as our ability, Mr. President, to guarantee the right to life and some of the other rights that we are committed to as a people. And so the National Housing Corporation has an important role to play in supporting the ambitions of the Barbadian people by ensuring housing. And this resolution, in this instance, Mr. President, is earmarked for new housing development to support those ambitions. So what is this expected to do, Mr. President? There are people in this country who earn somewhere in the vicinity between $2,000 and $4,000 a month. They want to be able to own a home, but in some instances, they cannot approach the commercial banks because many of them do not qualify. They're not able to benefit from a mortgage, a commercial mortgage, because one, they don't have the ability to save for the deposit in the first instance, and they want, even if they were able to save for the deposit, Mr. President, all of the other associated fees that go into a mortgage transaction, they don't have access to, Mr. President. Your closing costs are not insignificant. And so we as an administration were proud in January of 2022 to ensure that for first-time homeowners in our manifesto, we spoke specifically about the provision of financing support to be able to contribute to those closing costs. But in order, Mr. President, for us to be able to get to those closing costs, to be able to provide the legal assistance or whatever those needs are for you to be able to do that, Mr. President, people have also to be in a position to first and foremost get a house. We have to be able to have the housing stock that is built at a price that is affordable to the demographic that we're talking about here, Mr. President. I know also of so many instances, certainly in the last 10 years prior to 2018, where supposed low-cost housing was built, but the people who fell into the low-income category couldn't qualify. And you had so many people who housing was designed for, who then could not walk into a bank or any commercial institution because no provision was being made for them. But this administration has established what we all now know not only as the NHC, which is a long-standing entity, but we have also established HOPE. And we have been able to twin the access to renewable energy with the access to housing to be able to create a mechanism where people can not only own their homes, but they benefit from reduced costs for the electricity by having access to solar panels on their roofs, and those solar panels inbuilt into the housing programs then contribute to offsetting the costs associated with their home. Mr. President, this is a transformational initiative by this administration that targets those in the lowest income brackets among us. And work has already begun, Mr. President, in some instances, and you've seen some of those places. You have NHC designs that have already been put out there. You've seen the mortgage fairs that have taken place and the thousands of Barbadians that are finding themselves present at these mortgage fairs, not because they have somewhere to live already, Mr. President, not because they want more, they already have a house and they want a couple more, but because there is a genuine need for decent housing among Barbadians. There is something very special, Mr. President, about walking into your home for the first time and seeing where your money has gone. Any of us who have gone through the mortgage process, it took me, Mr. President, 8.5 months to close on my mortgage. Unfortunately for me, in this instance, half of that, for those who are lawyers in here, was spent in the legal processes, dealing with conveyances and all that kind of stuff. It was a painful thing to have to go through. But when you have finally finished that, Mr. President, and you walk into your home for the first time, there's something special about being able to say, I want to paint this wall in this color. There's something special about being able to say, this room we want to use for that. There's something special about either using furniture which you already had, or repurposing, or going into a furniture store and buying new furniture, Mr. President, because it all of a sudden has something meaningful about it, Mr. President. And when you have that christening of the house, people still do christening of the houses where they invite their friends and their family because everybody wants to show this is where my money is going. And then after a little while, I was driving down Highway 2A yesterday morning on my way to an early morning meeting in the north, and I saw some of the developments which people are now adding to. I see people building large expansions onto houses that were already provided initially. And so as Barbadians are wont to do, Barbadians are ambitious people. We always want to be able to do better for ourselves and for our children. So Barbadians then find themselves, okay, get a little money, I can put on a little extra bedroom. I got the room, I can put on a little extra. I can landscape. I'm gonna put up a fence. I wasn't able to have up a fence before. I can take my garage, it's all right. I may not need my garage. I can turn it into an expansion of my TV room or my living room. We do things like that, Mr. President, because as we get a little money, we expand. So housing is such a basic principle, and it is so much a part of who Barbadians are, that in places like Concordia in St. Philip, Clifton, Coconut Hall in St. Lucie, Branchbury, Ginger Works in St. Joseph, and a couple more, the National Housing Corporation has already begun to do this work. And similarly, the expectation is that on these lands, that there will be the construction of dedicated projects, and they're looking to be able to see how duplexes and quadruplexes can also be built in different locations around the world, because we still are an island state. We only still are 166 square miles. Everyone is not going to be able to have a dedicated standalone or what we call a single family home. There are those who may be happy to be able to have stairs internal to the house because little children like stairs, and so duplexes and so on may be exciting for some people. And so you are going to have a range of housing options. And the Minister of Housing has spoken at great length on more than one occasion. And the Prime Minister has said the same thing as well. Our ambition as an administration is to build 10,000 houses to make them available for a range of income categories. And on this occasion, Mr. President, this sitting of the Senate is being asked to look at the vesting of 7,000 odd square meters of land at Sergeant's Village in the National Housing Corporation, the agency responsible for developing housing, in particular for the lowest income categories, for the purpose of developing a new housing program. And I am hopeful that all of the members in this honorable chamber will see this as a legitimate measure, will see this as something which identifies with the people of Barbados, and that we are in a position to call for this resolution today to pass. Few words, Mr. President, I am obliged.
Thank you, Senator Cummings. Senator Harewood.
Thank you, Mr. Acting President. It is always quite difficult for anyone to extend further after the presentation of the leader of the House, because she touches so many points and she directs them in such detail that it almost makes one want to sit and listen to her for the entire day. But be that as it may, I welcome the introduction by the leader of the House, leader of government business. But I also want to make a few points in terms of this resolution before the Senate. Interestingly enough, I passed the parcel of land this morning, which is to the western end of Bartlett's Tenantry Road in Sargents. A wonderful lot. I think this lot is going to have some transformational impact on those persons who eventually, when the time comes, will be given the opportunity to move into their own houses. But it made me think about what we had before and what we're looking to have now and what we will have in the future in terms of the housing revolution in Barbados. And I want to say that the approach of the government is holistic. It is not just about putting out a concrete structure. And I would go further and say that what we're building is not simply houses and units, Mr. President. We are building conservation units as well. Essentially, it will provide shelter, but the leader of government business did touch on the facilitation of renewable energy. So we're speaking about the conservation, first the production of energy on these units, and the conservation and the distribution as well, because it goes back into the grid. We're speaking about also the conservation and the capture or harvesting of water on these particular parcels as well. Thirdly, we're speaking, and I spoke with the Minister of Housing before this resolution was to be presented. We're thinking about considerations for the production as well as the utilization of food in the future in terms of considering food reserves on some of these lots as well, in line with some matters of food security. But Mr. President, I want to speak to what we had before as well, because when I heard the discussion in terms of providing duplexes and single units on this parcel of land, it made me think again about something that I don't want to belabor, but it made me think about a project that I once had an interest in terms of the housing and neighborhood upgrading project, which would have been back in 2006 to 2010. And a project which sought to provide space where space was not available in some very compact areas. We're talking about Greenfield, Gardenland, Allenview, and also Cats Castle in the city, a stone's throw away from here. And it made me think about, it makes me feel proud to know that we're advancing to the stage where we're looking at meaningful solutions in terms of housing, but it made me feel slightly angered as well to see the opportunities that have passed us in the past as well, back in 2009, where it caused even the Inter-American Development Bank to take back roughly $35 million from the ministry because of the lackluster approach in terms of providing housing in this country. Many persons will recall in 2009 seeing buses from the Transport Board drive from Emerald City to Farm Road in St. Philip, which is a 5-minute walk, depending on how fast you can walk. Buses commissioned to come off the road from stopping from transporting persons across the country simply to provide an optic of producing and giving persons keys to go into houses in Farm Road. And 2 weeks afterwards, many may recall the reports of many of these houses being substandard. I also want to center my anger on the fact that I live within a housing community as well, formed back in 1956 after the passing of Hurricane Janet, which is the Sears Court housing development. I don't live in one of the housing units, but I feel that Sears Court is one big community to me. It feels like one big backyard. It is my community. It is my home. And the center of anger, I don't want to keep saying the word anger, but it really angers me, it really touches me, is when back in 2008, 2009, I think 2007 as well, we had a situation where the most senior official, political official, would have been walking around giving out title deeds to persons that live in these units. And while off the cuff we recognize it may seem as though it is something that is meaningful, something genuine, it represented, some may argue, a breach of the law in terms of the consideration of the Condominiums Act. So when you have clusters or duplexes, persons living in apartments, you don't just give them the title deed without addressing things like communal sewage systems. We can recognize that many of the electrical systems run from apartment to apartment. You haven't addressed that as well. How are they going to move forward in terms of permission? But there's also the social aspect as well of bringing those persons on a unit together to understand that you will have to take some communal responsibility for some of the things that are happening here. As a result of the uptick of giving out these title deeds, there were arguments afterwards at some units in terms of persons recognizing, well, this parcel of land belongs to me, even though I have the well that services 2 or 3 other units to my left or to my right, but I don't think other persons should come and access it. Additionally, persons started to make movements to redirect the plumbing as well. And I don't want to go into too many details, but I want to say that these considerations are things that this government is looking forward to, and we are not going to leave people willy-nilly for the purpose of optics. We want persons to live in houses not only this week, not only next week, but for generations to come as well. And we want them to advance from house to house. Senator Boyce would know how this goes. He probably advances from many houses during his tenure. But I really want us to understand that the government is looking at something called the WEF Nexus. It has not been acknowledged, but I can acknowledge it in terms of the approach. WEF Nexus, WEF, water, energy, food, that is an entire holistic approach in terms of housing, water, energy, and food, WEF Nexus. And I want to also say that in terms of the water conservation, this is something that we will have to consider not only now, but something we have to consider going forward for the next couple of generations. Barbados is water scarce, we all know it. We know the issues that we face. And also coming perhaps before this august chamber and the other place, will be discussions in the future in terms of dual plumbing to ensure that a lot of the water that we usually would send out to the garden or usually would send out to the well can be reused to perhaps put into different types of use, like washing down the houses as well, Mr. President. This is something that sounds quite easy, but it's something that can also make a significant impact in terms of the reduction on the water bills of the households going forward as well. It means, Mr. President, that if we adopt this water use philosophy, water use infrastructure, and put it legally into our infrastructure, that we can have a situation where we're not shelling out $80,000 between the two fish markets, the Oysons and the Bridgetown Fish Market. We can reduce that bill by 65% in one fell swoop. Significantly, I have intimate knowledge of the operations in the fish market, and I can say that there are many opportunities to improve the operations of the fish market in terms of the utilization of water. The boats are washed with potable water. The units under the stalls are washed with potable water. And if we had a water reuse facility, a plant at that facility in Oysons and Bridgetown, the bills, the cost to the country and the cost to the network across Barbados, because if you use water here, it means that there's less water for someone else in some other part of the water network. It means that that availability would increase and the cost would definitely reduce as well. So, Mr. President, I want to say that this 7,000 and some square meter of land, or 75,000 square feet for those who prefer the square footage, is going to be purposed for good purposes in Sergeants. I believe that the persons who live within an earshot of the particular location, that they're happy to have the additional housing solution come to the area as well. I believe that they, based on conversations this morning that we have, I believe that they would welcome other lots within the same Sergeants area being treated to the same methodology of providing housing for persons. But as I told him, and I understand that the minister and senior ministers recognize that this may be a pilot project that can be replicated through the HOPE project as well. They recognize that we have opportunities not only in solar, but we have opportunities in terms of water for geoplumbing once we have that discussion within both chambers, and we have opportunities also in terms of consideration for food security as we go forward in terms of these housing developments. With those few words, Mr. President, I would thank you for allowing me this contribution.
Thank you, Senator Harewood. Leader of Government Business.
Thank you very much. I think our colleagues are ready for the temporary suspension of the House, and we will reconvene this afternoon. But I'm begging to move at this time, Mr. President, Mr. Acting President, that this resolution do now pass.
The question is that this resolution now do pass. Honorable members in favor, please say aye. Honorable members in disagreement, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This resolution now stands passed. And at this point,
Thank you very much, Mr. Acting President. I beg to move the suspension of this sitting of the House until 2:25 p.m.
The question is that this chamber be suspended until 2:25 in the p.m. Honorable members, please say yes. Aye. And honorable members in disagreement, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it. This chamber is suspended until 2:25 for lunch. Thank you.
perhaps maybe the shortest resolution in the history of this sitting of the Senate. And for the smallest parcel of land, Mr. President, it is for the vesting of lands at Lancaster, St. James. The size of the land is just no more than 1,400 square feet or 137.9 square meters. And this land is also, as was done earlier in the last resolution, to vest the lands in the National Housing Corporation, in this instance, not for the purpose of housing development, but for the purpose of road access. Now, Mr. President, in the previous resolution that was just debated by the Senate before we suspended for the lunch break, we went into great detail about the housing program for the government of Barbados. We talked about the importance of the HOPE project. We talked about the importance of the National Housing Corporation to the ambitions of the ordinary Barbadians, particularly those in the lowest income bracket. We talked earlier, Mr. President, about the number of people who are awaiting houses and about the number of areas all across the country that were being earmarked for new designs and new housing development. We talked about those lands, Mr. President, from St. Philip to St. John, and in this instance now in Lancaster in St. James. Mr. President, very recently I had the opportunity to drive up the road leading from Highway 1 onto Highway 2A, and I was able to see the evolution of the housing development there on the right-hand side as you are approaching the roundabout there just by Chafet on Highway 2A. And I think that there are many Barbadians who are as excited as I am to see the first persons moving into their homes to be able to say, this is my piece of the rock. And in this instance, Mr. President, we also have further development taking place also in the Lancaster area, and it is on this basis that this small sliver of land, which is now being carved out from the commercials lots, which are also being put up for sale in the area, that will be vested in the NHC to enable the provision of road access for the persons who are living in this area to be able to access their homes, Mr. President, that this work would be completed. Now, the only thing that I would want to add, Mr. President, to these discussions on housing is that it is important simultaneously as we speak about road access that we also understand that while building houses, the critical component of building houses and housing development is the associated infrastructure that needs to be put in. So the road access, which needs to be laid, all of the services that need to be put in, that work needs to be undertaken in parallel to the actual housing project and simultaneous to the actual housing project. And it is under the provision of these lands, Mr. President, that that road access will be made available. And so I don't know if I think that we need to spend an extraordinary amount of time presenting on this resolution. Most of what could be said has been said during the course of today. And it is on that basis, Mr. President, that I beg to move that the resolution vesting 1,400 square feet of land at Lancaster in the NHC for the purpose of road access be now passed.
Thank you. The question is that this resolution now be passed. Those honorable members in favor, please say yeah. Aye. Aye. Please say aye. Aye. Those members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it. Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Acting President, that now brings us to the end of government's public business for the day. And with your permission, we would like to move to private business. I defer to the clerk.
Thank you. Private members' business is the order of the day. Senator Dr. Bradley.
Thank you very much, Acting President. Fellow senators, the private members' resolution, which I presented to this honorable chamber on the 1st of June, which has been seconded by my colleague, Senator Dr. Maynard, was designed to bring to the attention of this honorable chamber and to Barbados society the reality that Barbados's level of food insecurity in the face of the current global threats, namely the COVID pandemic, the war between Russia and Ukraine, and the continuous challenge of climate change are, in a real sense, something which we must take very seriously and consider as an important element of our development. Mr. President, let me state at the beginning that the resolution was not designed to negate or belittle the important work being done by the Mia Mottley administration and the Minister of Agriculture, the Honorable Indah Weir, and his team to address this issue. In fact, Acting President, I am of the view that this administration is creating a platform for building a food-secure nation, and that these efforts, in my opinion, are the most significant political actions taken to address food security since the 1940s, 80 years ago. 80 years ago, when Mr. John Saint, who was then Director of Agriculture, mandated that all plantations in this country plant 12% of their land in food crops. That was during the Second World War. Food security, as defined by the FAO and the United Nations Committee on World Food Security, means that all people, at all times, have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their food preferences and dietary needs for an active and healthy life. Given this definition, Mr. President, it is clear that food security is much more than increasing the production of food. Food security includes access, availability, quality, and safety. Food security is vital to the health and prosperity of any nation, and food insecurity undermines national independence and sovereignty, as a food insecure nation depends on others to feed it. That dependence limits your independence and your capacity to take decisions in your own interests rather than in the interests of those who feed you. Moving from a food insecure nation to a food secure nation, therefore, involves removing some of the shackles of colonialism and using our God-given treasures, fertile flat lands, for food production, rather than producing sugar for the colonial masters at an economic loss. Food security is not and should not be a partisan political issue, as recent evidence has shown that it is not good for our country to be at the mercy of other countries for our food or our energy supplies. And as long as we spend scarce foreign currency to buy food, we will have less money to support health care, education, and critical infrastructure products. As a matter of fact, Acting President, I believe that just as we have an energy policy going to 2030, where we have declared that we should be sufficiently supplied with sustainable energy by then, we should have a policy for our food security also, so that we have a reasonable level of security in this country, food security, by 2030. Mr. President, food security is a multidimensional topic, and therefore we must engage the entire population and the entire society in what is a transformation and integrated approach if our efforts to improve security, food security, are going to be successful. A plan for food security, therefore, must have short, medium, and long-term goals. A multi-sectoral, multi-dimension approach that include nutrition, health, education, tourism, and manufacturing. A plan for food security must have an appropriate budget. A plan for food security must have target dates for the achievement of its objectives. A plan for food security must involve the people, the farmers, the youth, the private sector, the church, and all levels of society. A plan for food security must resolve the risks and challenges of food production and take into consideration how we treat with limited water supplies, land, predial larceny, and the ravages of our monkey population. A recent report prepared by the CARICOM Secretariat and the World Food Programme indicates an increasing level of food insecurity in the Caribbean region. An estimated 2.8 million people, or nearly 40% of the population of the English-speaking Caribbean, is said to be food insecure. Quoting from that report, severe food insecurity continues to increase in the region, with the current figure of 72% higher than when compared to April 2020. Highlighting the lasting impact of the pandemic, 2 years in, the results demonstrate deteriorating food consumption and diets, with 25% of the respondents eating less preferred foods, 30% skipping meals or eating less than usual, and 5% going an entire day without eating in the week which led up to the survey. High food prices continue to affect people's ability to afford a nutritious diet, with 93% of the respondents reporting higher prices for food compared to 59% in the year 2020. The ongoing crisis in Ukraine is expected to create an even deeper impact on the cost of basic goods and services in our region. End of quote. As presented in my resolution, I therefore would like to take this opportunity today to share with the Senate the vision presented for agriculture in the year 2012. And I've had the support of the Secretariat to distribute to you today a document which had been shared, I think, with all senators. The document is dated, and it is dated 2012. But, Mr. Acting President, a lot has not changed in the agricultural sector since then. In early 2012, the then Ministry of Agriculture, Food, Fisheries and Water Resources contracted my services to lead a process which would inform the development of a white paper for the agricultural sector of Barbados. This work was accompanied by the cooperation of the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture and the Agricultural Planning Unit of the ministry. The ministry facilitated a national consultation which was held, and town hall meetings were held in Bridgetown, in St. Philip, in St. George, and in St. Peter to obtain the opinion of the people and the ideas of the farmers in terms of how we should proceed. The document which you have today includes input from these meetings and presents a vision for the agricultural sector of Barbados. The document examined the global context of agriculture at the time and its impact on small developing states. The factors that have contributed to the decline of the agricultural sector in the island, especially the decline in sugar production, were identified and the reasons for the state of agriculture. It sets out a new vision, a vision to change the agricultural sector from an agricultural sector based primarily on the production of sugar for export to an agricultural sector oriented towards the production of food for food security, nutrition, and health of the Barbados population. The document presents the view that an agricultural sector that is technologically driven, competitive, and market-oriented can contribute to 6 aspects of national development. 1, an efficient and effective and modern agricultural sector can contribute to foreign exchange savings, reducing the current food import bill, which at that time was estimated at $653 million. A modern agricultural sector can provide safe, nutritious food, which will help to reduce the incidence of chronic non-communicable diseases such as diabetes, stroke, high blood pressure, heart attacks, and obesity. A modern agricultural sector will generate agribusiness enterprises, which can result in the production of jobs and the reduction of high unemployment. A vibrant agricultural sector will reduce food prices by producing food closer to the market, thus reducing transport costs, energy consumption, and imported inflation caused by high food prices in international markets. A vibrant agricultural sector will support the local economy by indicating that money spent on food production in Barbados generates wealth in Barbados. Money spent on foreign food generates wealth in other countries. In other words, instead of supporting local farmers, we support farmers in distant lands. And a modern agricultural sector will help to preserve the beauty and the aesthetic appeal of our country, as preservation of the beauty and aesthetic appeal of our economy and country is important for the health of the nation and the maintenance of our tourism industry. The sector also contributes to maintaining the biodiversity, reduce the erosion of soils, restore the fertility of our soils, thus reducing the need for expensive fertilizers and ensuring the preservation of our environment and our heritage. The proposal presented a national food plan to improve the food security of the nation and to provide healthy, nutritious food for Barbados. The proposal presents the view that a modern Ministry of Food and Nutrition Security that is focused on feeding the nation, which coordinates food imports, food production, food safety, food quality, and food security is a necessity. We felt very strongly when we presented this proposal that food importation and food production should be controlled by the same ministry, and not food importation controlled by one ministry and food production controlled by another ministry, because in that way we could support the view that we should not import foods that are available locally when they are produced by local farmers. We've had the case of onions being available in Barbados and onions being imported into Barbados. I'm sure there are persons here who are aware of those challenges. The proposal also recognized the establishment and the need for market information system, farmer training, strengthening farmers' organization, investment in new technology, establishment of a wholesale market for farmers, and promoting the production and consumption of more local foods, which can contribute to the modernization of the sector. We felt that the ministry must also continue to work with international and regional partners and technical cooperating agencies in supporting a strategic plan for food. It was felt that the proposal will contribute to an improvement of the quality of life of Barbadian people through the production of healthy food and products to make Barbadian agriculture an important contributor to the diversification of the economy. The implementation of the proposal will reverse the decline in the current agricultural systems, preserve the environment as we seek to establish a green economy, improve farmers' incomes, facilitate synergistic linkages with tourism, health, manufacturing, generate jobs, and preserve and improve the social stability of the Barbadian society. Mr. Acting President, the vision recognized the following as critical. We recognize that agriculture is much more than primary production, that an improved level of food security is fundamental to the growth and diversification of Barbados' economy, that linkage of the sector to health, nutrition, tourism, and manufacturing, if emphasized and developed, can redound to the benefit of the society and the people, that the sector is a prerequisite for poverty alleviation and a reduction in the cost of food and reducing the high food import bill, that the production of food locally will contribute to employment creation and the creation of business enterprises, and preservation of the agricultural sector is in the long-term strategic interest of the Barbados society. We therefore propose a food and nutrition plan that had 6 components: increased production and consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables, increased production and consumption of root crops, the development of a Barbados black belly sheep industry, the production of cassava for human consumption and as an input for animal feed to reduce the import of corn and other grains that are used in feed production, increased production and consumption of fish, and agro-processing and agribusiness. The food and nutrition plan will be implemented by providing farmers with land, technology, market information, infrastructure and incentives, and various other inputs necessary for increased production. The plan will not be successful unless there is coordination of actions with the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Commerce, the private sector, and farmers. The policies and political will to bring about change in the food and agricultural sector is critical for the implementation of the plan. We felt there should be attainable goals, an implementation strategy, a monitoring evaluation system, and a reporting mechanism to the country, to the cabinet on the implementation of the plan. We felt that the plan must have appropriate levels of financial resources, and we were concerned that looking at the budget, at that time, only 1.5% of the budget was allocated to the agricultural sector. This is in contrast to the numbers which are seen around the world, where between 5 to 10% of the budgets in most other countries are allocated to agriculture. But generally in the Caribbean, the allocation to agriculture from the national budget is very low in comparison to other countries. The plan must be product-focused and consumer-driven and must ensure effective linkage between farmers and the market. The plan should be endorsed by the Cabinet. The plan for each commodity must have short-term, medium-term, and long-term strategic goals. And the food plan must recognize that Barbados will not become self-sufficient in all areas and in all food supply, but that we can do much better than we're doing. In fact, a bold objective of the plan was to reduce the food import bill by 10% every year for the next 5 years, starting with 2012, so that by 2017, we had predicted that we could reduce the food import bill by 50%. The successful implementation of the plan will depend at that time on important changes, introduction of new technology, new marketing arrangements to respond to the supermarket revolution, because we recognize that the supermarket had now become an important source of food for the Barbados population. To respond to the supermarket revolution, there was need for standards, quality, and reliability of supply. Improvement in technical and managerial capacity of farmers was identified. New consumer thinking that values fresh, locally produced food. New investment in food processing, food storage, greenhouse technology, and packing facilities. A permanent mechanism for cooperation between the private sector and farmers, the university and the trade unions. A national market information system. Implementation of agricultural health and food safety legislation. Establishment of a Ministry of Food and Nutrition Security. The ministry at that time was considered a Ministry of Agriculture. I congratulate the government on refocusing the ministry to give food and nutrition security emphasis. Increase investment capital from both the public and private sector. We proposed at that time an agro-tourism council to facilitate better linkages between agriculture and tourism, so that the tourism sector could be assured of quality and reliability of local production, and that quality and reliability are critical factors in the tourist industry. And unless we attack these challenges, we will not be able to make agriculture attractive to the tourism industry. Establishment of a Food and Nutrition Council to promote more nutritious food, especially in government institutions, in the prisons, in the school meal program, in the hospital, and other institutions. There was need, in our view, for a Food and Nutritional Council that would coordinate the movement of food from farmers to these institutions, ensuring reliability and quality. We also saw the need for an agribusiness development unit within the Ministry of Agriculture. We wanted to ensure engagement of the commercial banking sector and the credit union movement to make financial resources available to farmers and other sector workers by reducing the cost of credit. You see, Acting President, the area of financing of agriculture is special. Agriculture is special in its financing because many times you cannot place a consistent return on investment up front. If you plant coconut or mango trees that are going to take 3 years to mature and produce a product, you require special financing. You cannot sign up to a loan agreement that says you have to pay every month when the tree is going to mature in 3 years. And therefore, agriculture requires special financing because of the nature of the sector. the risk involved in the sector. And the sector requires agricultural insurance. So the farmer can be assured when there's a hurricane or when there's a flood that his investment is protected. We felt that we must modernize the fishery sector and that we must seek to spend more research and investment in understanding the fishery sector. I remember we complained some time ago about the flying fish going to Trinidad or going to Tobago. But have we studied why? Have we studied how to maintain them in our jurisdiction? What are the conditions that are required? And how do we ensure that we harvest more from the sea? We need to studies in marine biology. This is where our university becomes important, so that we can understand the behavior of the fish. We can understand the behavior of the CA, and we can ensure that we have constant supply of these important commodities. We felt that we should involve and review our trade policies that affect negatively on production, that allows cheap imported products to undermine local production. This is an issue that requires serious consideration. If you are going to develop an effective agricultural sector, you cannot allow cheap imported products to undermine your production. We felt there was need to promote a favorable, enabling environment for farmers, promoting reasonable access to credit, efficient access to incentives, reasonable and reliable access to fertilizers, water, market information, access to technology, and the assurance that the farmer can make a reasonable living from the pursuit of an investment in food and agriculture. We saw the need for the development of a farmers training center and a model farm for cooperation in cooperation with the University of West Indies at Cave Hill. We felt this was important because the Faculty of Agriculture of the University of West Indies is located in Trinidad and Tobago. And while it is true that persons have gone from Barbados to train at the University of West Indies in Trinidad, we felt there should be a school of agriculture in Barbados that trains middle-level functionaries that can contribute to the agricultural sector. We felt it was important to engage the society in a process of dialogue for change, taking Barbados into the 21st century as a country with a balanced development agenda, in which the food and agricultural sector contributes to economic development, health and nutrition of the nation, and the preservation of the environment. Fundamentally, Acting President, that's some of the elements of the document which I've presented to the Senate today. There's much more that is there. Agritourism linkages, the importance of developing an agricultural development bank, it is all defined in that particular document. But I think, Mr. Vice President, or Acting President, the Senate should take note of some of the international dimensions in the international dialogue that is taking place around the world. On the 19th of May 2022, the Secretary General of the UN, Mr. Antonio Guterres, said armed conflict creates hunger as fighting destroys farms and factories, drives people away from harvest, causes shortages, and drives up prices. Today, the impact of conflict is amplified by the climate crisis and economic insecurity compounded by the pandemic. And so we see the war in Ukraine. We see the situation between Russia and Ukraine. And we believe that once the ports are open, food supplies will continue to flow. But, Mr. Acting President, lands have been destroyed. Farmers have been destroyed. And therefore, the possibility that we will return in the short term to a business as usual situation is not a reality. Today, the Executive Director of the World Food Programme said, when the Nobel Prize was given to his agency, it was a clear message that food security is critical to peace and stability around the globe. What we are seeing now is an extraordinary destruction of the values we hold dear of feeding the poor and helping the needy around the world, end of quote. He warned that while food prices are #1 problem in 2022, there will be a food availability problem in 2023. The Director General of the Food and Agricultural Organization has said that worldwide prosperity is being reversed, emphasizing the need to prevent the acceleration of acute food insecurity trends in coming months and years. He urged expansion of food production at a country level. Here in Barbados, the consumption of good, healthy food will help to curb the tsunami of chronic non-communicable diseases. It may be more prudent to spend more money producing good, healthy food than spending money on the hospital, if in fact it can be shown that good, healthy food will reduce the incidence of diseases which are taking up a significant part of our health budget. The recently held meeting in the Cooperative Republic of Guyana on investment needs for modern agricultural sector was timely, and the government should be complimented for the positive steps that have been taken to address food security in this nation, especially in the promotion of linkages with Guyana and Suriname. But it must be clear, Acting President, that we must be careful not to import products cheaply that will undermine the same products that we're trying to promote locally. There's need for policy decision in that area. Import substitution in agriculture should be a priority for all countries. According to a recent Forbes article, it could reduce the 400,000 tons of wheat which we import into this region if we produce cassava and other root crops. This could reduce the food import bill by some 10% if appropriate measures are adopted to increase the production of crops like cassava and other starchy materials. While applauding the efforts of the current administration, there's need for a revolution in the food and agricultural sector, an integrated work program that addresses the political, economic, nutritional, sociological, and historical nature of the problem. When we presented the proposal, we indicated the need for integration, the need for cooperation, the need for an integrated approach that involves all sectors of the society. In pursuit of this idea, therefore, today I call on our current government to look at the agricultural sector as a strategic sector, a sector that can contribute a significant amount to the development of our country. Sometimes, Acting President, we fail to remember that in 1957, this country produced 200,000 tons of sugar and was considered a jewel in the British Empire. Being a jewel in the British Empire was not based in our reserves of gold. It was not based on our reserves of oil. It was based on the fact that this country, this little country, 166 square miles, was producing for the British economy 200,000 tons of sugar. Today, we produce 10,000. I don't know, the figure is probably less in 2022. And therefore, it is our lands, our fertile lands, our flat lands that were seen as being a jewel. Today, we must retake that vision and use our lands again to be the source of wealth of our country. We cannot allow our lands to be covered in River Tamburn and Cowich while we import cheap food from elsewhere. It is not good for economic development. I therefore call on the government to reposition the agricultural sector and recognize farmers as important contributors to our economic development, and decree that all idle land be used to produce food. That we should strengthen the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Nutrition Security by providing appropriate human resources and financial resources needed for the implementation of plans and programs. We should allocate more resources to the sector, especially for investment in new technologies and market information systems. We should invest in agro-processing. Let us produce breadfruit flour. Let us focus on processing our fruits and vegetables. Let us produce juices from Barbados cherry and from the things that we know and grow. The Barbados cherry has 100 times more vitamin C than the average orange. Let us concentrate and let us promote our local products. Let us focus our research and development efforts on agricultural technology for the production and processing of locally produced food. Let us promote a change in the consumption pattern of our people from a focus on imported food to a focus on consumption of local food by promoting nutrition education and the implementation of appropriate policy measures. Let us review the policies on importation of food items and promote incentive to produce locally produced food. Acting President, I live in a country once where it was against the law to import any product that was available locally. It was considered a crime, punishable by law, if anyone imported a product that was available, that was produced locally. We need to develop a regional agricultural information system that would inform on the availability of food supplies in various countries of the region and strengthen and promote facilities for regional trade, creating an enabling environment for new industry. And we should look at the possibility of developing for payment for regional food trade in local currency and a system of agricultural insurance. I therefore call on the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Nutrition Security to review our land use policy. Barbados has a limited amount of land, only 106,000 acres. And therefore, it is critical that we review our land use policy to ensure that we have land for housing, that we have land for recreation, that we have land for sports, that we have land for all the things that are necessary. But most importantly, that reserve a certain amount of our land for food production. I call on the Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training to develop individuals with skills and knowledge and competencies to engage in production and processing of food, to develop the understanding and appreciation of careers in agriculture, to train teachers of agriculture and food sciences so that they can promote agriculture as a career among the youth, to create the ethos which generate a better understanding of the food and agricultural sector and its significance for national development, and to make agriculture and food security a compulsory subject on the curriculum. I call on the Ministry of Tourism and International Transport to promote linkages between agriculture and tourism so that tourists can consume more locally produced food. I call on the private sector to promote private sector, public sector partnership, and the private sector to invest more in the production of local food, using their communication and marketing mechanism to promote the distribution and marketing of local products. I call on the University of the West Indies to underscore the importance of research and innovation for agricultural development, undertake basic and applied research to address current and future challenges of the Barbados farming community, and provide management options for agriculture and agribusiness enterprises. I call on the university to generate appropriate technologies to support sustainable growth of agricultural production. I call on the university to develop innovative extension strategies and formulate effective mechanisms for the transfer of technology to institutions and farmers to enhance their production and to generate competitiveness. I also call on the university to protect our biodiversity and preserve the agro-ecosystems of Barbados and document traditional knowledge and technologies. I call on farmers to use technology to produce good quality products at reasonable prices and to manage their farms as a business enterprise. I call on all Barbadians, as citizens and consumers, to join the journey to national food security by buying more locally produced food items, thus supporting our farmers, developing community gardens and backyard gardens for food production, avoiding the consumption of processed foods and ready-to-serve meals that are rich in trans fats, saturated fats, salt, and sugars. And finally, I call on the press, I call on the communication media, and I call on the church to give priority in their messages to the people of Barbados that the consumption of healthy local food is good for health and long life and for the progress of this nation. Mr. Acting President, Senate, we ask to recognize that these are not ordinary times. As we seek to build a modern Republican society and a modern economy after COVID and after the war, reducing food insecurity in our society should be an important priority. Failure to achieve the goal of reducing the food import bill by 25% by 2025 could result in higher food prices, hunger, starvation, and an uncertain economic future. Mr. Acting President, I thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Senator Dr.
Mr. Acting President, I have asked Senator Dr. Maynard to second this resolution. I ask that this be moved and considered at this time.
Senator Maynard.
I move, therefore, that this resolution, with the support of Dr. Maynard, that this resolution be now passed.
Mr. Acting President, I rise to second this resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Acting President. I beg to move that further consideration of this item be postponed and that we revert to public business.
The question is, that we consider further consideration of this particular bill at a later date, and we continue with business of the. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those honorable members against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Be committed to public business, sir.
Mr. President, in accordance with the standing orders of the Honorable the Senate, I beg to move that the following item be removed from the order paper. Item number 1 on the public business, to have the second reading of the Constitution Amendment Bill. I beg to move that this now be removed from the order paper.
The question is that this bill be removed from the order paper. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Leader business.
Thank you very much, Mr. Acting President. This concludes the government business for the day. I beg to move that the sitting of the Senate be adjourned, sine die.
The question is that this sitting be adjourned, sine die. Those members, honorable members in agreement, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This session now stands adjourned.